a forest older than memory, there once lived a sage who spoke the language of fire. His name was Jamadagni, a rishi of immense power, a master of sacred knowledge, and yet he is remembered less for his wisdom and more for his rage. This is the man who, upon sensing his wife had sinned and thought not deed, mind you, ordered his son to kill her. And when the boy obeyed, Jamadagni simply nodded, pleased. This isn't just a story about cruelty. It's a story about ideals, about the peril of purity, about a world where obedience mattered more than feeling, and the cosmic order Orta was worth dying for or killing for. Today, we venture beyond Athens, beyond reason and rhetoric, into the myth-soaked world of ancient India. Welcome to the story of Jamadagni, where fire burns even in the stillness of meditation. Jamadagni was one of the Saptarishis, the 7 great sages. He appears in multiple texts across the Hindu tradition, the Vedas, the Puranas, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. He's sometimes treated as a mythic figure, sometimes historical. He's called a Brahmarishi, a sage whose tapas, or ascetic heat, elevated him to divine insight. His name literally means he who is born of heat or fire. Jama, restraint, plus Agni, fire. In Vedic language, that's more than poetic. Fire isn't just warmth, it's the primordial messenger between gods and men. Its will, its sacrifice, its speech. Jamadagni wasn't just a priest, he was fire with restraint, will, governed by discipline. Until, that is, it wasn't. To understand Jamadagni, we need to understand his world. He lived at a time when knowledge was not written, but recited. Where gods weren't up in heaven, but inside the syllables of chants. The Vedic worldview is complex, but we can say this. Reality was built on order, hinta, and that order was upheld not by laws or logic, but by ritual, sound, and tapas, spiritual heat gained through austerity. Rishis weren't idle thinkers. They were reality maintainers. Every act, from prayer to silence, affected the cosmic weave. Jamadagni, then, was not a philosopher in the Western sense. He didn't write treatises, he lived them. His thoughts were sung. His will was ritual. Renuka was Jamadagni's wife, devoted, chaste, and powerful in her own right. Each day, she would fetch water from the river in an unbaked clay pot, kept intact solely by her mental purity. One day, as she approached the river, she paused. Just for a moment, she saw a pair of Gandharvas, celestial beings, bathing and embracing in the water. Her mind flickered. Just for a second, but that was enough. The pot dissolved. Her power slipped. Her mental chastity was tainted. When she returned, Jamadagni knew he had the insight of a rishi. He said nothing. Instead, he called his son Parashurama and ordered him to kill her. Parashurama obeyed. Jamadagni then said, "Good, now bring her back." And so he did, with the same ease as unsheathing a blade and slipping it back. Now, stop. Let's pause here and ask, what exactly is being taught? Is this a story about righteousness? About how the will of the sage transcends conventional morality? Or is it a critique? Philosophers from within the tradition have long debated this. For some, Jamadagni is the very model of Dharma, upholding divine order no matter the cost. For others, he represents the danger of Dharma unmoored from compassion. What does it mean to be righteous if righteousness demands violence? And is obedience still a virtue when the command defies the heart? The story doesn't give us an answer. It leaves us uneasy, as it should. Jamadagni's power came from tapas, not fire in the literal sense, but the internal fire of focused austerity. In the Vedic world, this spiritual heat was generative. It created insight. It birthed gods. It sustained the cosmos. But like any fire, it could burn. When Jamadagni's temper flared, it wasn't mere rage. It was the breaking of an ascetic seal. His control snapped. His sacred energy unleashed. This raises an essential question for any seeker. Is discipline still discipline if it leads to destruction? Or does restraint require release to be real? Jamadagni's son was Parashurama, one of the 10 avatars of Vishnu, a warrior sage, a bridge between Brahmin and Kshatriya worlds. After Jamadagni is later killed by a Kshatriya king for withholding his divine cow, Parashurama takes up his axe and does what any dutiful son raised in such a household would do. He exterminates the entire Kshatriya class 21 times. Not exactly pacifism. The legacy of Jamadagni, then, is not one of gentle teaching. It's one of cosmic tension, of power, knowledge, wrath, and repentance, locked in eternal return. Parashurama would eventually renounce violence, but only after the fire had burned too long. What philosophy do we find here? Jamadagni's story isn't one of arguments and counter-arguments. It's one of embodiment, of ethical provocation. He raises questions still asked today. Can moral purity ever justify emotional cruelty? Is tradition a guide or a shackle? When is obedience cowardice? And when is it strength? Like all mythic figures, Jamadagni speaks in symbols. But those symbols contain ideas. Jamadagni dies not in peace but by violence, killed by kings who wanted his sacred cow, Kamadanu, a divine giver of all things, a sage, slain for his power, a fire extinguished by greed. And yet, that death sets off a transformation, Parashurama's journey, the reconsideration of wrath, the rebalancing of worlds, even in death, the rishi teaches. So who was Jamadagni? A philosopher? Not by syllogism, but by intensity. He reveals a world where knowledge isn't thought, it's lived, where ethics isn't a rule, it's a tension. He was terrifying, uncompromising, and he forces us to ask, can clarity exist without compassion? Can cosmic order include the chaos of the heart? In Jamadagni's silence, we hear a challenge. Dare to live by fire. But remember, it burns. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this, consider subscribing for more stories from the roots of philosophy. There's plenty more where this came from. Hope to see you soon.